Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Let's Write an Adventure, our ongoing live stream where we are creating a full campaign in real time, predominantly focusing on building our own domain of dread. This is an adventure series where we have uh, our characters are sort of sucked into this world that is, well, our domain of dread uh, and are forced to kind of find their way out. Um, we've conceptualized a world that takes place in and around an enormous sort of inland sea, and so we've got lots of sunken buildings and underwater wreckage. We've got the ruins of civilization sort of around the rim. We've got a spire. We've got ideas for a sort of a spire castle-like complex in the center. We've got floating islands made of ghost ships and earth motes floating above it all, and just bleak gray weather, and just a nasty, nasty place if you were to find yourself in it. And so we've built our first adventure so far in here, and we are jumping backwards a touch here to start working on kind of our initial starting location, our where our characters enter this domain of dread and where they land to start. So we did some brainstorming for that last time a couple weeks ago. Sorry to miss last week, but I was a little under the weather, and you guys don't need to listen to me hack, cough, and sneeze on here for an hour. Um, so let's go ahead and kind of get back into what we were working on, our brainstorming there. Let me quick share my screen here, and we were working on our U section using our story circle sort of format here, and we were still doing some raw brainstorming. We had done some work talking about kind of the general overall vibe of this domain of dread, and sort of what the atmosphere would be like, and we were slowly working our way down to the community itself, this first town where our characters will arrive and start. And so I think that's where we want to pick up. We've done a little bit of that. We've talked a little bit about sort of when they arrive and what the atmosphere is like. We've talked a little bit about the architecture in terms of things being made from the husks of once well made but now ruined structures, repairs having been made with found and inferior materials, creating kind of a shanty town like feel. Um, and materials coming from washed up ships, the carcasses of monstrous creatures like whalebone, huge crustacean shell parts, maybe even kraken or aboleth parts, that kind of deal. We talked a little bit about it being a diffuse, milky light that gives everything a very washed out kind of feel to it, like the color's been sapped away. And we decided that it needed some perpetual fog that kind of blankets the town and the coast, limiting visibility even during the light of the day. And then we talked a little bit about the culture. We decided for this town that since they are a community on the edge of an inland sea, they would take their sustenance from that. They would have lots of foods, including soups, crustaceans, fish. Poultry would come from captured seabirds. We talked about their government, that it would be kind of this, this conflicted sort of gangland fiefdoms, and the different gangs would control different regions of the shanty town and protect their own areas, and that few, if any, civic structures would exist. The culture is kind of rough and tumble, piratical in ways, um, and that those are the kind of people who exist here for the most part, kind of in keeping with our idea. Um, so I think today we might want to spend some time coming up with some of the actual structures in our town. So last time, I believe it was Amanda who suggested that we need a tavern, and wholeheartedly agree. We absolutely do. We probably need some other buildings as well. So why don't we go ahead and start by coming up with uh, Darkport's sort of core, I'll say core structures. And so the idea here would be things that the party's likely to interact with. We don't necessarily need to work in everything that a working town might require, but there should be, but there are a limited number of things that your players might want to interact with initially. And so we should probably start kind of making a list of those, and then we'll build out those various buildings. Very much kind of like what we did with Skysong Gulch. If you have been with us since we built our first adventure in this series, way back earlier this year, way back when. So let's go ahead and make a section for that. Let's say heading, let's just kind of give a divider here. We'll say Darkport, because that was our working name for this place, Darkport. Say points of interest is what we need here. So as always, please feel free to comment with your own thoughts and opinions in the chat. I love hearing from you all, and this being kind of a collaborative dialogue really makes this process just a ton more fun, I think. You guys are so creative, and I really appreciate all the ideas that you pour into this. So let's just start with a basic list, I think. So let's start with a tavern, and we'll reformat this as we go. But let's say a tavern, we're going to need... so there's always the question I come up with taverns is whether we want them to be just watering holes or whether we want them to be places to stay as well, like making them inns. You know, I go back and forth. I think since we kind of need the party to go to one of them, we might make it an inn and tavern to start, but we might make some other tap rooms, some other sort of just pure watering holes where the characters might go to drink, and introduce them to different parts of the town that way. So let's say inn and tavern, inn and tavern. That's one idea we're going to need. We're going to see an ale house, and let's come up with one that's a little kind of low, a little kind of rough and tumble. We'll say a what do we want to call it? We could just call it we'll call it a dive bar for now. All right, so again, I kind of use this 3-item rule as I go through and I'm building something. When I'm building something out, if we've got 3 choices for something, it gives the players enough choice to make a meaningful decision. We don't need 3 for everything that we put in here, but if I'm going to do multiples, I usually shoot for about 3. So what else do we need? We probably need stores of some kind. So again, that begs the question of whether we think we want sort of a general store, whether we want more of a market with various stalls in it. Places like this, I kind of come back to sort of memories from some of my travels. Personally, I spent a couple years living in West Africa, and I remember very distinctly the markets there, the weekly markets there, and kind of how you would have these little, you'd have some very almost like one road kind of towns. And then one day a week, they would just explode with this market that would just kind of, people would set up their stalls and it would kind of materialize out of almost nothing. And it would be, just kind of quite hustling and bustling and that kind of deal. And that was primarily how shopping was done there. And I kind of feel like it would work the same way here, where there would be a market as opposed to a bunch of fixed stores. This doesn't seem like the kind of place where people would invest a lot in having fixed places of business necessarily, especially with some of the fluidity of kind of the gang politics of controlling territory, and they're probably trying to take territory from each other and what have you, and you're aligned with one organization and not another, and so sticking to certain parts of town might be safer for you. And when I say you, I mean kind of the general, I mean your basic citizen of Darkport. So maybe we go with a market here. Market. We should still have a few sort of, I imagine, some fixed buildings, some businesses that that are a little more permanent, a few of them, but not a ton. So we probably want maybe a smithy to some degree. I know we were talking a lot about found metals and that kind of stuff and how valuable they are. So there'd probably be very few of those, maybe just one person that's kind of become the expert. And because there's only one, they don't get messed with because it's such an important skill. Certainly, I'm sure people try to, you know, stay on that good side because they need that equipment. So maybe one smithy, maybe let's see here. Um, Most of this could probably be like most adventuring gear could probably be taken up by the market. Maybe an alchemist. What is that? Alchemists or apothecary. One or the other. For potions and that sort of deal. Um, Maybe some other contraptions, some other magical sort of contraptions. Um, and again, we probably don't need a ton of those, just a little bit of that. Um, I could see that being kind of like run by a sea hag, and so we could have an instance where we have a hag who's not necessarily evil per se. I mean, not good. This is a domain of dread after all, but like somebody the characters might actually do business with as opposed to like fighting. That's a distinct possibility. Um, hmm. What else? What else? What else should we have in here? Should we start with? Um, hmm. We could. Let's see. We probably should have some shrines, some holy places. Um, Again, I don't imagine them being big churches, no cathedrals, that kind of thing. But probably a couple shrines to various relevant deities. Um, Shrines. Let's say shrine one. Let's do 3 shrines. Shrine 2, shrine 3. We probably need uh, some thieving guilds, if you were, or maybe uh, gang chapter houses, that kind of stuff. Some uh, some some faction locations we probably need. Where do the Aboleth faction hang out? Where does the Slotty faction hang out? Um, that kind of thing. So let's say Aboleth faction chapter house. Let's say Slotty faction. Something a little more chaotic than a chapter house. We need another name for it. We need, we call it clubhouse for now, um, or roadhouse. That's a little more chaotic. And then we probably want just some of the other factions in here have some smaller guild halls and that kind of deal. And some, so we could say Thieves Guild. We could say, we'll say Gang 1, Clubhouse, Gang 2, Hideout. And that gives us, 3 factions other than our Aboleth and Slotty. And so we'll probably want to build those out. We may decide we don't need all that, but the size of a town having 3, 4, 5 factions, it makes sense, and it gives us some more players to kind of play with here, because we already kind of have 3 factions that are that kind of jump out at us. We got Aboleth, we got the Slotty we've talked a lot about, and then we probably have some people who are allied themselves with this elemental villain at the core of this domain of dread. Something we haven't really built on yet, but we can't forget about because that's an important element here. Um, I don't know that our elemental villain is the quote unquote big bad per se. Um, you know, We haven't decided whether or not they're actually going to have to fight this villain at any point, although I imagine they will. We've really kind of started laying tracks for the Aboleth faction and Slotty faction to be kind of our big players here. Um, but we'd still want people aligned with this elemental villain. So they would be one of these, or maybe maybe one of the shrines is devoted there, and that's where that faction is. We end up with a few others. So let's see. Anything else? Hmm. I'm always tempted to put in little restaurants and stuff like that, but you don't necessarily need to. We can kind of figure that out as we go. Put in little tea houses and ramen bars and what have you. Um, but just kind of for flavor, you know what, we've got the space. Let's add a couple things on here that may just be one line of description, just to give us some things that we can kind of describe as the characters walk by. And then we may have we want to maybe build out some, we'll say monuments, if you will, but more like navigational markers, since this place isn't going to have, um, it's not like they're going to maintain a museum or build statues in the squares. I mean, they might build statues in the squares, but not probably in the sense that we typically mean. They might be a little rougher than that. Um, but those are all things that, while the players might not interact with them, it kind of gives us points of interest as we navigate or as we narrate moving about the town. It kind of gives us things that they can pass, and we can describe little vignettes, which sort of brings this place to life. So let's get a couple restaurants, little places in here. Let's say we want a tea house, and we'll say noodle bar. And maybe we'll say fried food cart. It kind of travels about. And again, I think that these here are just going to be, sort of one line descriptors, a sentence or two for each of them. Nothing crazy, just to give us a little bit of flavor as we go. Flavor restaurants. I really didn't intend that. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's see here. We're gonna turn all of those into, am I gonna have to do these one at a time? Yep. Let's turn all these into headings. Can I? Nope, I can't just select them all and do that. That's frustrating. Not that Notion watches this, but if they did, I'd recommend the ability to mass change. Okay. Yeah, let's work through just the formatting bit here. I know this isn't the most enthralling portion of what we do, but it is vital to how my brain works. So I will lose pieces of this if we don't do this. So here we are. At last. Okay. So let's roll down the list here and do what we normally do. We kind of start with what we know, what we can already visualize. We already kind of talked a little bit about the market here. So let's do some brainstorming for that. Let's say the market is a rotating collection of mobile stalls and carts that roams about the town daily. PC carts that roam about the town daily. PCs can find all manner of adventuring gear here, including used but not new weapons and armor, though the location changes from day to day following a week's rotation through the city. I won't say the city, the town. We'll say that most stalls are only open one day a week, but there's enough duplication that something is open every day. So we kind of have this idea of this weekly market that kind of, if our town's in, I don't know, I will say five districts. I was about to say 5 quarters, and that wouldn't make any sense. So 5 districts. If our town's in 5 districts, we have a weekly market or whatever. Then you've got it's market in one district on one day, and then a different market in another district on the next, and so on and so forth. And I realize that doesn't add up to 7 days, but so maybe there's a couple days in which it's just hard to find anything. You might have some struggles with that. We can decide on whether or not we want to do that. I go back and forth on the verisimilitude of that, because that is, that's reality. I've certainly lived in places where, if you missed market day, you were kind of out of luck for the week, depending on what you were trying to buy. And I could see in game that would add a certain level of grittiness or realism to an adventure, which could be fun if you have the right group, but it could also become kind of a hassle if if your characters aren't, or your players aren't really interested in engaging with the world on that kind of level. So we can play around with that. We can decide what we want to do. But let's give a little bit of description. Let's see here. Description. Let's say stalls are mostly made of found materials, wood made greasy from use, and the briny air, or the briny breeze. Tarps made of tanned monster skin or patches of old sailing cloth. Mismatched wheels. Mismatched wheels. Say shopkeepers are often dour or suspicious or maniacal. Kind of Maybe not maniacal, maybe or we could say, or almost giddy. There could be sort of this, forced giddiness in some of them. We talked about having some people that are just kind of like overly welcoming. Um, but cool. All right, so that's enough brainstorming for our market. Again, we're not, this is still all loose brainstorming here. We're not setting any of this in stone just yet. Um, just kind of trying to get an idea of what might be where. Now, the nice thing is that we'll probably end up using a lot of this brainstorming for our for the final product when we kind of create the inns and ale houses and what have you, because we don't necessarily have a lot to toss into these. So it's not a lot of wasted energy. Some of it'll just end up being kind of copy and paste it. But let's not limit ourselves by trying to jump ahead. Let's work through the process. So, where should we go next? What do you think? We could do the smithy. We could go there. Especially because if we only have kind of the one, that would say something. We could make this sort of an iconic figure, maybe even a central point within the town itself. So, all right, so let's work through this. Let's say metals of workable quality are rare finds in this domain of dread. They come from ships lost at sea or are stolen off travelers who venture into this pitcher plant land. No mining occurs. I would probably say not no mining, but no significant mining occurs in this world. Consequently, most metal equipment, weapons, armor are scavenged and reused. Only one location exists within Darkport to commission new items of smithcraft. This makes the smithy a kind of neutral ground within Darkport, and a figure, and the smith, a figure of some influence. Right? Because when there's only one, nobody wants to risk losing their access. So, what would our smith be like, do you think? I I kind of imagine an eccentric craftsman or craftswoman or craftsperson or artisan or whatever word we want to use. Um, I imagine that this is somebody who, while they wield a certain amount of influence and power, probably doesn't use it very often, other than to kind of single-mindedly pursue their, um, their chosen artistry. Um, not to say that they're unhinged or anything like that, but that or insane, but that they're kind of singular in their focus. They're not really worried about the rest of the world. It's like they're focused. Their whole world is their craft. It's really the only thing they're too concerned about. Um, it's sort of what comes to mind for me initially. Um, I don't know. You have any other ideas? Let me know. Um, let's see here. Maybe Smith is an Jonathan says the wandering market is a great idea. Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. Thanks, Jonathan. Um, it's I will tell you that if you're gonna if you're writing anything, especially something I found in D&D, is that travel has never hurt me in my if you're able to, travel has never hurt me in my ability to write fantasy stuff, especially for D&D. There's just uh, so much out in the world that will inspire ideas like that. So highly encourage it if it's within your abilities. Um, all right, so back to the Smith. So let's see here. Maybe the Smith is an eccentric artisan who cares little for the world outside their forge and is obsessed with their craft. This means they rarely exercise their influence further, resigning them to this sort of perpetual neutrality in the overall scheme, the overall political landscape of Darkport. Okay. So what would the smithy look like? Well, everything in town is kind of ad hoc. It's all found materials. It's all cobbled together. I imagine that there might be a certain level of craftsmanship in the smith's workshop, though, but not not exceptional outside of the metalwork, right? Um, what if I kind of have this image of it almost like kind of the husk of a building on three sides, no roof from the original structure, but that like the stones of the original building, the masonry, the original building kind of form the walls. That there's kind of like a central tent pole kind of deal and a kind of a tarp that makes the roof. Um, I kind of imagine that it's made from maybe like tanned whale hide or something to make it waterproof, right? Um, you've got a forge in the back with sort of the kind of a pipe fitting kind of sticking out of the through kind of a hole in the tarp, um, meaning that, like, as it rains, you get a little trickle of water in there and it hits the forge and it steams and sizzles, and so you kind of get this um, this kind of this extra foggy effect at the back there. Um, I imagine kind of maybe a wooden front to it, made of old ship's planks, that kind of deal. Same sort of deal with the floor. Actually, no, the floor would just be dirt, I think, in case you dropped, little globs of molten metal and what have you. Um, Maybe even stone. Maybe it's the original flagstones from the original building. Um, hmm. Yeah. Let's start with that, unless somebody has a better idea. So, um, built from the husk of um, a squarish ruin. The old masonry forms the walls on 3 sides. And the cracked ancient flagstones make the floor. It's an open concept kind of structure with a towering tent pole in the center that holds up a roof made of a whaleskin tarp. The forge in the back looks kind of like a kettle stove, reinforced by field stones. Say a pot-bellied kettle stove. The chimney snakes upward through a hole in the tarp that allows just a little rain to dribble in and flash to steam on the hot forge. Hot furnace, we'll call it a furnace. Forge, furnace, kind of the same. We're using them interchangeably. I'm sure there is an actual difference in blacksmithing, but we're using them interchangeably here. The concepts. Work tables line the walls, and a small hammock is strung in the corner near the back where the cooling forge can keep the smith warm at night. Okay. Kind of takes shape in my mind. we're going to want something for the smith. Wondering if we should focus on that now or jump somewhere else in here. I'm kind of getting a Doc Brown, Rick Sanchez kind of kind of look for our Smith. I don't know if I like that or not. Um, we'll think about that. I'll have to think about that because that's kind of like the your stereotype of kind of the eccentric genius, if you will. And I don't know if we want to go with the stereotype on that. I think we might want to change it up just a little bit. Um, have a more surprising character. So we'll think about that. Let's put a pin in the Smith themselves for the moment. We'll think about what they might look like. We're going to do some more brainstorming for NPCs kind of as we go. That was one of our brainstorming questions is, what NPCs would the characters encounter shortly after their arrival? Um, and so we want to kind of put in all the possibilities here. Again, if you were doing this for your own group, I don't know that I would necessarily spend all this time kind of crafting this out, as it were, ahead of time. Some of this I would just kind of make up as we went. Um, I'd have some bullet points in here, but since we kind of have the time as part of this, let's build it out. Let's really make it fleshed out and as thorough as we can be. I mean, why not? We've got all the time in the world. So, let's say, what do I want to build next? We need to do something about the Slotty faction and the Aboleth faction. It's important to the story, so we need some we need something for that. So we know a little bit about we've talked a little bit about the Aboleth faction, and kind of since we've worked sort of with them in that need section there. And so we probably have some better ideas for there. So maybe let's think about this Slotty faction. What would their place be like? This one's really kind of been keeping me up at night, because a slot is a creature of chaos, right? And so the faction would kind of encompass that chaos, which does not mean that they can't have machinations and plans and what have you. But there's a certain level of anarchy that goes along with this. And so, what does an anarchist's organization sort of look like? And it seems sort of like an oxymoron to me, but at the same time, we know that it can sort of function. We see characters like this, like the Joker in DC Comics and that kind of deal, that have followers, and they're certainly not going to sort of rebuke them. But there would be a certain level of chaos, a certain dog eat dog quality about it, I imagine. Um, So, what would this place be like? Um, I imagine. I imagine it would be sort of a de facto headquarters, not something that was made per se, but simply something where these members started gathering. Um, what would draw them in? What would be the mood of this faction? First thing that comes to mind is Fight Club, right? Think about that and think about maybe, maybe this was a place with some, some pit fighting, or some cage fighting, some entertainment, and now it's kind of been taken over by the slotty faction because they're, the majority of the patrons. Um, maybe we start with that. Maybe there's a pit fighting. Um, so let's jot some of these ideas down before we lose them here. So let's say um, slotty, compass, pure chaos. There would be an anarchist quality to their faction. Let's see here. Jonathan says the Roadhouse might be rowdy. The Slod would rule through intimidation, keeping their people loyal through bullying, as well as promises of freedom from the demi-plane. Yeah, I agree with you on that. I mean, I think that makes the most sense to me. This would be the strongest rules kind of, by right of might kind of organization. It would definitely be rowdy. Um, uh, so let's put that down. Let's see. The Roadhouse would be rowdy. It's almost like a biker gang kind of quality to it in terms of like I say like the you kind of see as they're portrayed in the movies. I won't fess any firsthand knowledge of how real biker gangs work or how real motorcycle clubs work or anything along those lines. But sort of the way that they're kind of portrayed in the media, that kind of feel to it, I imagine. Would be rowdy. The Slod would rule through might and fear. Beating down challengers even as it promised escape, release to those loyal to it. I imagine, though, that the most loyal wouldn't want to leave the demiplane other than sort of to conquer other places or maybe expand outward. I think that there would be a certain fondness for the lawlessness of it. But I think that I think you're right. I think most of them would be promises of release in some capacity, whether that's escape from the plane or whether that's just an end to the torment of it in some capacity. Let's see here. The Roadhouse probably didn't start as the Slod headquarters. It became that after the faction members were drawn to some other entertainment here. I'm thinking pit fighting, the pit or cage fighting, something violent, and as brutal as the Slod itself. By might, or I should say by right of might, that phrase kind of sticks out to me when it comes to this Slotty faction. Yeah. And I think there's probably more than one Slod. think we probably have a death slot at the top, and we probably have followers who maybe want to become, you know, Slod themselves, Slotty themselves. And so we kind of have this upper echelon, maybe, of red and blue and green and gray, uh, Slotty. They kind of pepper throughout. Because something we probably don't want to happen right away, just from a storytelling standpoint, is for the players to have instant access to the leader of any of these factions. Um, because I mean, to be honest with you, it would be unusual for, I mean, in most cases, for anybody to just kind of walk into a building and go, "I want to talk to the boss." I mean, there's a hierarchy in pretty much every organization that generally people want you to follow. Um, but we definitely want them to have contact with Slotty right out of the gate. If they were to come to this place, at least spot one or two, um, and and that also kind of gives us a point of comparison, right? Like if we show off the biggest and baddest of them, this death slot right out of the gate, well, then that's just kind of the point by which the characters will evaluate all other Slotty. But if we start with something like a red Slod, um, and start with something like a red Slot, and we kind of talk about compare it to sort of the regular mortals in there and how much larger it is and how much more powerful it is. And then as we build, we have this we have this hierarchy that we can get bigger and badder, and that really puts that death slot into perspective. And also, what's the challenge rating on a death slot? Because I want to say it's somewhere in the ballpark of an aboleth. Yeah, it's a 10. So it would put it's a CR10, and which is the same CR as an aboleth, which would kind of put them on par. So we end up with this kind of equivalent leadership here. Jonathan says the multiple Slotty makes sense. I was initially assuming one Slod, but it could infect its followers to spawn more Slod, and I think it would. Don't you? I agree. I think that it would do some more of that infection. And Jonathan says, this begs the question: do the aboleth infect followers and make them scum? Yeah, I think so. Probably, we get that kind of deep scion kind of stuff going on here. I think there would definitely be aboleth followers that are infected and infused and empowered in some capacity. Again, we kind of want that hierarchy, don't we? Because right now we've established sort of these base cultists that that level 1 characters can face, and we want something more challenging as we go. We want these factions to be important throughout our adventure, and so giving them room to grow, I think, is really important. We can up the tension, we can up the difficulty as it becomes relevant. We can hint at even tougher fights and tougher entities that the characters just aren't powerful enough to take on yet. It gives us a lot of storytelling room to play, and so I think that hierarchy is going to be important for both of them. So let's make a little note in our little aboleth chapter house too. Aboleth infected followers scum with powers similar to the aboleths, but not as powerful. Cool. Gives us something to chew on for next time. Anyway, we're getting close to our end here, and I think this is a good place to go ahead and put a pin in it for next time. So let's go ahead and wrap up. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. As always, I really appreciate all the input and the insight that I get from everybody here. It makes this so much fun for me to get your ideas and your thoughts on this and to have this sort of very organic, creative time with everybody. I know I say that at the end of every one of these, but it continues to be true, and so I will continue to say it. So thank you so much for spending this time with me. Um, we will go ahead and pick up next week at our regular time, same bat channel, same bat time. So that's going to be on the 6th of January. So our first one of the new year. Exciting. And this was actually our 40th episode of Let's Write an Adventure. So kind of a mile marker. We've done a lot of these this year, and I'm excited to keep doing more of those with you all in 2025. Um, that being said, I will also be doing my Wednesday live stream this week, and so a little chittier, chattier sort of discussion of TTRPG topics. Still figuring out a topic for Wednesday. So if you got some thoughts, ideas, things you'd like me to kind of discuss, or you want to talk with me about, let me know. I would love to hear your thoughts, and give those give those some episodes. I'd love to chat with you guys about that. All right. So with that being said, if you've enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, leave a comment. All that kind of stuff helps the channel grow, helps me continue to do this sort of stuff. So thanks again, and I will see you all in the new year. Bye.